Okay, so this morning I'm going to talk about projects being bets, and some of the things I'm going to say, I don't know. We'll see if they're controversial. I think this first idea about projects being bets, is relatively controversial, and this is basically the idea that the only way that a project gets kicked off is if at some point somebody shrugs their shoulders and says, fuck it, we're going to do this. If you spent too much time trying to figure out what the odds of success of a project are and whether the benefits are going to be worth the costs, nearly no projects, in fact I would say no projects, would ever get off the ground. The only way they get off the ground is if at some point somebody is prepared to take the risk, or prepared to have their organisation take the risk. They shrug their shoulders and they say, fuck it. But the interesting thing about when somebody's done that, so that's the first game. I'm going to talk about 7 different games as I talk about bets. The interesting thing is, when somebody does that, when somebody shrugs their shoulders and says, fuck it, then obviously whoever it is who's done that has exposed themselves to some risk, because if it becomes clear at some point that the project doesn't succeed, then there's going to be a lot of people who are not very happy with the person who said fuck it. So there's another game that immediately comes into play, and this game is it's got a name. There's a chap called Venkatesh Rao writes about it in his book The Gervais Principle, and this game is called Heads I Win, Tails You Lose. And what does this mean? What this means is that the people who shrug their shoulders and say fuck it, part of the reason they do this is because they're fairly confident that if things go badly, they're not going to be around. They will make sure that they're elsewhere, or that somebody else gets the blame. And if things go well, of course, they'll be absolutely present. And of course, projects look like they're going to do well and then look like they're in trouble and then come back and pay off. And so one of the things about the people who do this, about kick projects off, I'll stop saying fuck in a minute, is that they come and go. They stay distant from the project when things aren't going well, and then if the project launches and it's a success, well, what do you know? Those people are back in town. So that's the second game, and that happens almost immediately. That has to be being played almost like immediately after somebody kicks off the project. And the third game is like this is kind of like something that is very strange. It's kind of connected to the previous two very closely, and this is something that is talked about by a chap called Albert Hirschman, who was an economist who worked for the World Bank, worked for the Federal Reserve in America, started out as a German, he was a Jewish refugee, but he coined this term, the hiding hand. And this is a pun, it's an economist's joke on the guiding hand, which is Adam Smith's idea that all prices find a level by some secret mechanism. And the idea of the hiding hand is that lots and lots of projects are kind of helped into being by everybody involved, kind of covering up what the risks and problems are, especially in the early days of the project, because they want the project to get going. So everybody at the beginning of a project is motivated for the project to get going. So the people who kick the project off, the fuck it people, they want the project to get going, so they want to cover up any kind of initial problems that anybody finds with the project. And of course there are people who are working on the project, the people who are being funded to do it. They don't want to see absolute kind of problems that will kill the project stone dead. They don't want to spot those either. So there is this kind of collusion between everybody involved in a project to cover up the problems until the project's really going and it's too late to stop it. And part of this is game number 4, game number 4 I've called project management theatre. So project management theatre, it goes again hand in hand with all these other things. So somebody's just shrugged their shoulders and said, yes, let's do this project. They haven't really worked out what the risks are. They haven't really worked out what the problems are. They think they're going to be fine. They're going to be far away. If anything goes wrong, they're going to be close to if it succeeds. Lots and lots of other people mysteriously help them in this endeavour. They cover up the issues using project management theatre and using the hide in hand. And so project management theatre is creating plans, creating ceremonies, having lots and lots of artifacts that are green all over that make it look like the project's going to succeed. And all of that is pretty much, nobody knows that the project's going to succeed. If this is all blended in with a hiding hand, there are probably quite serious things that make it likely that the project isn't going to succeed. But people get involved in this because they want to get paid. They want to be busy doing something. And also, like the people who kicked it off, they want, they're never going to do anything. They're never going to get any credit unless something pays off. And in order for something to pay off, everybody has to pretend that every project has a good chance. Now, this may seem like I'm not saying anything about how to deliver the impossible. I'm not helping anybody. I'm just being cynical. But I think what is important is to understand what's going on. What's one way of helping you deliver the impossible? By knowing what you're doing, right? So knowing, and also, remember, I'm not saying that you can stop any of this. I'm not saying that any of this can be changed. I don't think it can. But we're getting now to the point where something can be done if you're involved as project manager, or even if you're the person who said fuck it and you want to increase the chances of your project succeeding. So this is like game number 5, which is called shortening the odds. So your project has got a non-zero chance of failing, right? That's everything. I'm walking to Starbucks. That's got a non-zero chance of failing. It could fail. I'm hoping it doesn't. So there are some odds on the project succeeding. There are some odds on the project failing. But what can you do to better those odds? Are there things that you can do? None of the things that we've been talking about up to this time have actually improved those odds at all. But there are things that you can do. There are things you can do to shorten the odds and increase the chance of the project being a success. And those are the things that I talk about all the way through the book, and the things that I'm going to keep talking about, which are user research, so understanding the people who might actually use your software, organizational research as well, which is like understanding the complex organization that you're trying to deliver this software into. So that's stuff that I talk about in the chapter The Swamp. All of the complex ownership that's inside the organization that you're trying to do this with, all of the complex regulation, and there are outside bodies that regulate it, all of the moves that are happening, what's changing, understanding organizationally what's going on, and understanding the people who might use it. These are great ways of improving the odds. And this is different from like, say, betting on a horse. Once you bet on the horse, there's not much you can do, right? But in this case, what you can do is you can do lots and lots of work to give your project a better chance of succeeding. So basically, understand what's going on shortens the odds. This is the game of shortening the odds that we're doing now. And then there's another aspect to shortening the odds, which is working software. Deliver some working software that does some of the thing that this thing is supposed to do as soon as possible. And put that in the hands of users if you can, and put that in the hands of users with their real data in it, so they can be really, really using it if you can. And the point about this is, again, this is shortening the odds. This is reducing the likelihood of the project being a failure. There are all sorts of technical aspects to this. If you can get the software running on the real servers where it's really going to be launched, this is kind of really important. So those those are two aspects of the same game, number 5, which is shortening the odds, right? Which can counter the craziness that went on to get the project kicked off, the craziness that went on for everybody to pretend that it's fine. Here, finally, in number 5, there's something that you can do to make things better. And then there's a 6th point. There's a 6th game, which is possibly the hardest game, but it is one that's really, really important to understand, and that's upping the stakes. And somebody's really trying to make a point extremely emphatically there. Yes, so upping the stakes. So what do I mean? One of the things that happens when you start doing user research and organizational research, and you start actually getting working software in the hands of people, is sometimes you realize that yes, this thing could be a success, but it's only going to be a success if even more investment is put into it, if the bet is even made bigger. So you've been trying to make the odds smaller by getting people to use the software early, by understanding what's really going on with the users and with the organization. But sometimes you see that the software is only a small piece of a bigger thing. And if you don't, not you, it won't be you, if the organization doesn't fork out for this extra bet, this extra investment for this other thing, then the whole thing's going to be a failure. So an example of this that kind of I work with was, we were working on a system that was doing some it was basically a database of very, very complicated regulations. And what we realized was that yes, we could build this database of regulations, but it needed an entire team of people to be set up to curate these regulations, to understand what version they were at, understand what the life cycle of particular regulations was, badger people from different places to send in new versions of regulations. It needed people who knew what they were doing, basically. If it was just the software, it wasn't going to work. And that I call upping the odds, upping the stakes. And so in a lot of projects, what you do is you get to a point where, I don't really know much about poker, but it's a bit like poker. You get to a point where the only way to win is to bet more. And of course, this is a decision point. Maybe the organization, maybe the people involved don't want to bet more. But that's the only way that this project is going to be a success. And this brings me, by saying it's the only way it's going to be a success, this brings me on to game number 7, which I've called the nonsense accumulator. So at the beginning I said every project is a bet, and bets have a non-zero chance of failure and a non-zero chance of success. But this isn't true exactly, because some projects are doomed. Sorry. And part of the reason that they're doomed is because there isn't just one bet with low odds of success. That's been compiled with several other bets with low odds of success. And at some point you getting to the point where there's really no chance of this project succeeding at all. And very often I've worked on several of these projects, and very often the reason that these projects are going to fail is because they've accumulated several nonsenses. They've accumulated several aspects which by themselves would make the project really, really difficult to deliver. But if you have 2 or 3 of these things, and I use the word accumulator because that's the word in betting, for like betting on multiple numbers of horses and betting that they will all win. So the idea here is that if, let's say, most projects have this nonsense, which is we're definitely going to be able to do everything we need to do by a particular date for a particular amount of money. That's a nonsense that nearly every project has. But what if you combine that with a nonsense like, and we're going to use this new technology that doesn't really exist yet. There's lots of hype around it, but in fact it doesn't perform. That's the second nonsense. And then what if you combine that with a couple of other nonsenses, like you're not allowed, the development team is not allowed to talk to any of the people who know how this thing should work. And you all have to work in the office, and there's no Wi-Fi. Those are all real examples. Any one of those would make a project extremely difficult, but combining them all together gives you a nonsense accumulator, a project that has no chance of success. And I know when you're writing books like this, there's an expectation that I'm supposed to be able to tell you that there is a way out of this wood, that there's some way that you can make those nonsense accumulator projects work. You can have a try, you can try and hack away at one or two of those nonsenses and try and get them out of the way. Some of those are relatively easy, the ones I just talked about, so they're all soluble. But when there are 3 or 4 of them connected together, very often time is going to pass and the chances of you managing to make it a success are going to be lower and lower. And in those kinds of situations, then it's important to spot that and leave. Get out of the way, because that project's not going to succeed and it's not going to do you any good either.